What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Star Wars Explained. Today, we are joined by the writers of Legacy of Vader, Jedi Knights, and the newly announced flagship Star Wars comic. Please welcome Charles Soule, Marc Guggenheim, and Alex Segura. How are all of you doing?
Doing good. Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have all of you, the architects of the future of Star Wars comics, all here in one place. Before we get too deep, can you each give us like a quick elevator pitch about what each of your comics will be about? Marc, we can start with you.
Sure. Mine is about the Jedi Knights, sort of at the height of their powers, pre-Phantom Menace. The way the book works is it's a little bit like the old Marvel team-ups or Marvel 2-in-1s, where we'll get different, combinations of Jedi in each issue, and each issue is a done-in-one. So each one's like its own little mini Star Wars movie.
Great. Alex?
The flagship title is basically to pick up right after the Battle of Jakku with a separatist group of planets that aren't as keen to join the New Republic as Leia and Mon Mothma thought. And that's the big overarching plot. The New Republic is still on shaky ground and still trying to figure itself out and trying to consolidate the planets that they need to succeed. Trade, resources, all these things. But at the same time, we're doing a lot of done-in-one issues, spotlighting each of the core casts as that threat kind of unfolds over that first arc.
Cool. And Charles?
My book is about Kylo Ren. He is the supreme leader of the First Order, so it's set right after Episode 8. It literally picks up like 5 seconds after Episode 8 ends, and he's trying to figure out what the heck he's going to do, because Kylo has been through enormous trauma at that time in his life. The events of Force Awakens and Last Jedi are really compressed in time. It's like, I'm not going to make a definitive statement about timeline stuff here, but it is a very short amount of time that he has like killed his own dad, met Rey, like had the confrontation with Luke. It's a lot in a short period of time. And so he's trying to figure out who he's going to be going forward. And so he looks back to his grandfather's legacy, which is why the book is called Legacy of Vader. The legacy of Vader is a complicated thing, and we follow Kylo as he sort of retraces Vader's footsteps. For example, he goes to Mustafar, he goes to Tatooine, he goes to Naboo, and so on. And it's pretty great stuff.
Awesome. We're going to get deeper into each of these comics with each of you, but I have another group question because I'm honestly not overly familiar with the comics industry. So could you take me through your experiences developing and writing a new ongoing Star Wars comic? Like, do you bring Marvel a pitch for a certain era, or do they come to you with an idea? How does that work?
Well, it's.
I like how we both looked at you.
Yeah. No, I mean,
you feel that one.
It's essentially, it's an ongoing conversation that lasts a long time. The discussion about what's going to happen next started way before the previous line of Star Wars titles, which were primarily set in the period between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, episodes 5 and 6. So long before those were finished, but when we knew they were wrapping up, discussions started about what was gonna happen in the Star Wars line next. And the general direction that started to coalesce was the idea that we would be hitting different time periods and telling really compelling stories in each, to be able to give stories to audiences that maybe gravitate toward those different time periods. So you've got your prequel fans, you've got your sequel era fans, you've got your original trilogy fans, and this line is giving something to all of them. So that really evolved in discussion with Lucasfilm, with Marvel, with Story Group, with people like the wonderful Mike Seglain, who hopefully everybody listening to this knows and loves. And then it just starts, like, different things are floated, different things start to feel like the direction, and then it becomes more about like casting and getting artists on board, getting writers on board. And then from there, you get into the story like nitty gritty. But the sort of 10,000 foot discussions happen really early.
Interesting. So I love that you're kind of spreading out and offering a big variety. So I'll ask each of you, what are you hoping to serve up to the various fans? So Marc, you've got prequel fans. Alex, you've got kind of OT, but also New Republic fans, and Charles with sequel fans.
Look, the thing about like the Jedi in the prequel era is we've obviously seen a lot of them, particularly through the Clone Wars, series, but we've never actually seen the Jedi sort of in a regular day at the office, as it were. We've only seen the Jedi either on the decline or at war. So what I think is cool about the Jedi Knights book that I'm doing is that it's the Jedi at the height of their powers, before their decline, before the Clone Wars. Basically, what does it mean to be the guardian of peace and justice in the galaxy? And that makes for just the backdrop for so many exciting adventures. Like I said, each issue is like its own little mini movie. So I'm trying to show different corners of the galaxy with different kinds of threats and different ways for the Jedis to basically be badass.
And it seems like you could include some really cool characters based on the time period that you're working with.
Yes, right? yes. Well, I should probably mention that. Yes. So we're definitely going to see as many different corners of the Jedi Order as possible. But our perennials are Qui-Gon Jinn, who's not dead, which is great. Writing alive Qui-Gon Jinn. Ben Kenobi, Yoda, Mace Windu, we got Ki-Adi-Mundi, some deep cuts, and also some brand new Jedi too. One of the things that I always like to do when I write for Marvel is it's fun to play with the toys, but I always want to add some toys to the toy box as well. So we're going to get some brand new Jedi, which I'm really excited about.
It's funny. What happened to all those guys you mentioned? Qui-Gon and Mace Windu.
Sure,
I haven't heard much about them lately.
It didn't work out too well for some of them. There was, I don't know. I was told that Mace Windu was hands off. Too soon?
Very good. I should say all three of us are dads.
Yes.
So that is the kind of humor you can expect from this interview. Get used to it. Yes. You're going to love it.
Dad jokes in all three of these comics. Got it. Yeah.
I think the big theme for me with the flagship is familiar but different. We have these iconic characters and we're bringing them into this relatively unexplored era, right after Return of the Jedi, right after Jakku. So the idea is to present them in unexpected ways and introduce new characters and new threats, but still kind of do those touchstones, see what happens with the Imperial hardware after the fall of the Empire. Where is Han's head at as he, just a new father, that's relatable to the three of us, but, and what does a new threat look like in this period of time? So it's a thrill to play, like Marc said, to play with these great toys that are so iconic, but also you want to add to the tapestry. And so we're definitely doing that with some of the characters you saw in Jakku, but also some other new ones.
And Charles?
I wrote a comic book a little while ago called Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith with Giuseppe Camicoli. That was back in 2017, I think. And it remains a title that I get asked about and people mention it to me all the time as something that they really thought was a strong look at Darth Vader as a character. And so for me, in many ways, the book is called Legacy of Vader, which is I was already nervous about doing another sort of ongoing dark side book after having something that seemed to land so well with the Vader book, but actually putting Vader in the title just sort of ramps up the intensity for me. But I think what I'm doing in this book is really trying to write it as a Kylo Ren book, right? Which is also to some degree always a Ben Solo book. Although at this point, Ben Solo is very, very backgrounded within Kylo's personality. He's Kylo Ren pretty much all the time in himself and in his mind and in his heart. So Kylo Ren's a real jerk. He does real terrible things, as we've seen, over and over again. He chooses the ugly path, but he chooses it in different ways and more emotional ways than we see Vader doing it, generally speaking. Kylo will get kind of riled up and he'll get offended and he'll do things that are very sort of almost melodramatic and emotional in ways. I've used that word twice, but that I think is really the way that the book feels. There's a lot of emotion in it, even though Kylo is constantly pretending he's never touched by anything and doesn't feel a damn thing, which is a great character to write because you can sense all of this turmoil within him, and it leads to some really, really cool character beats. So I think what I would say people will be getting in this book is just a really fantastic character study of a person who is completely inside churning with fear and rage and all of the dark side emotions you could name, but on the outside is completely pretending that none of that touches him at all. He's just whatever, I'm totally cool. I'm a supreme leader. And it makes a really fantastic dichotomy. You see that turmoil come out sometimes in the storytelling, in the action. But I also get to tell a really, really cool Darksider action book, which is something that I think Star Wars fans always gravitate to.
I did get to read the first issue of that, and the opening pages had a moment that I just went, "Oh my god!"
You know the one you mean. I was probably the one I spoke to.
Yes.
So
out. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun there right off the bat. And since Legacy Vader comes out first on February 5th, I'll just stick with that. Charles, you brought up that you have written an incredible Darth Vader comic. I love that comic series. Were there any lessons that you took from that character and that story that helped inform how you wrote for his grandson?
Well, some of that I addressed when I was talking about how the way that the way that both Vader and Kylo present themselves to the galaxy, to the public, let's say, is very untouchable, unflappable, reserved, and all that stuff. And the difference between Vader and Kylo is that Vader did that because he successfully destroyed his emotions, I think, in many, many ways. And he felt almost nothing until he understood that Luke existed, basically. Whereas Kylo is still feeling all of it. Like he is very much in his feels, which I believe is something that still these days, even though he's pretending that he's not. So really the thing that I learned from one of the things that I learned from writing Vader that I'm applying here is the way characters present externally is not necessarily what's going on with them internally, and finding a way to signal or hint at what's going on in their internal life, while on the outside they just look like murdering monsters, almost kind of making them sympathetic in a way. Like I don't think you're ever like, oh, Kylo, you did your best there. I feel really bad for you, but you also can understand why he's making the choices he's making, even though they're pretty uniformly awful. So I learned that. I think that's something I'm taking away. And then I also think the other thing is to go further than you think you should in terms of the storytelling beats and the things that you would ordinarily think would be quote unquote okay, right? Like the beat that you're referencing, I'm guessing it's around page 3 or so of it, 4. Yeah. So that beat is one where I'm just going to do this, and if they say no, they say no. But to me, it was the thing that Kylo Ren would do in that circumstance. And then they were like, yeah, this is pretty great. What I have found is there are things you can't do, but everything else you can do. And so you just have to find the thing you can do that is as awesome as possible. That's how I like to write these books.
Have you bumped up into anything where they were like, nah, you can't do that yet?
Yes. Kylo has been an interesting book because it's set in a time that is perhaps not as like there's a lot of thinking about that era still. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of thinking about Kylo Ren, which is something I know that line is going to be taken to mean a million things in the fandom. I know. Right. It's not really that. It's more just like, well, we haven't really thought about exactly how many ships. I don't want to say anything about any specifics about any things that are fluid within the time period. Just let it be said that because it's a little newer, not everything has been answered as firmly in ways that are like would be the case with, say, the era between episodes 4 and 5 or something like that. So that means when I put something out there, it's like, oh, okay, we haven't really thought about that question or point yet. Do we want to let it be answered in this comic, or do we want to wait and consider answering it someplace else because it might have big implications? So sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no, but it's really more from the time period in which the book is set than any like negativity or anything like that.
One of the great things about working with Story Group at Lucasfilm is they want us to tell the stories that we want to tell. They're always, they're providing the guardrails and sort of where the various lines are, but it's always with a desire towards like, okay, we know that you want to do this. You can't do this for X, Y, and Z reasons, but what if you did that? And that is always close enough to our original this that it's really a collaboration, but it's really from a place of immense creativity and positivity.
Yeah, there's a desire for different voices to kind of bring their flavor to the bigger universe, and I think that's the best way to get new ideas into it.
Charles, you just came from writing for a very concrete era, right in between episodes 5 and 6, and now you're in between 8 and 9. Like you said, it's a lot more fluid. Not everything is as well defined. So is that more of a challenge, or is it a little easier to create with all that flexibility and openness?
I think it depends on the story point you're talking about, right? So there are particularly because one of the core conceits of the series is that Kylo is going to visit iconic locations that are connected to Darth Vader. So we see Tatooine, we see Naboo, and the question becomes, what do those locations look like in this time period? And are we going to define, like, for example, what Theed looks like between episodes 8 and 9? What's going on Theed between episodes 8 and 9? And there have been little bits and pieces of storytelling that have addressed that, but it hasn't really been landed on hard with both feet. And so it becomes a bit of a negotiation to say, well, we love the idea of going back to Naboo. We understand why you're doing it, but like, do you want to say that this building that we see in like the palace has been blown up? I'm not going to do that because that's too maybe a swing that I would rather save for some other story element. But at the same time, you can do really, really interesting things with, say, for example, the First Order, which is in a really wild place at this point because of what happened in episodes 7 and 8. They lost Starkiller Base, they lost Snoke, they lost a gigantic chunk of their fleet. And so what do they do to address those things? And some of those were sort of touched on in things like the Resistance TV show. There are elements that you can pull up, but a lot of that is considered pretty fair game, which has been really thrilling and interesting. And then, of course, there's the third element, which we all get to play with, which is you just make up cool stuff that doesn't have any connection to the main through line, and you can just do the coolest things you can. So I don't know how much I should spoil, but there's a point where I guess this can always just be cut out later if it becomes too much, right? The idea is to promote the book, right? Yeah. So there's a point where Kylo decides that he needs to face a Jedi after what happened with Luke, and so he goes on a search for any possible Order 66 survivors, which is a plot point that I think is really rich to think about and explore this far after Order 66. So I don't know. I see a shadow outside the room. I think, but stuff like that is really fun because I just get to do what I think makes the most sense and then see what happens.
There's that. It's kind of a fun mirror of Vader as well. Like that was one of his first missions, right, in your comic series.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you've written Ben Solo right as he became Kylo Ren. Now you're writing him right as he became the Supreme Leader. Has your approach to the character changed at all since the release of The Rise of Kylo Ren? Yeah,
I mean, the Ben Solo is not Kylo Ren, and Kylo Ren is not Ben Solo, even though they inhabit the same physical body. And Kylo Ren is more than just like a character that Ben Solo took on. Like Kylo Ren is his own person, very much the same way that Vader is not Anakin Skywalker, even though in some ways he is. So Rise of Kylo Ren is a book about Ben Solo and the choices he makes and the losses he suffers and the things that make him Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren is a book about Kylo Ren figuring how to be even more Kylo Ren, which is I just think of them as sort of two different people, and it tends to work out pretty well.
You've written in just about every Star Wars era that currently exists. So do you take a different approach to writing a story set during the reign of the First Order versus the High Republic?
Yeah. I mean, the key to what I do, one of the key elements to what I do that I think helps a lot or makes it work as well as it does is that I can draw connections between all those eras. So there may be something from the High Republic that drops. I actually don't remember if I've done this yet, but it's possible that I have no personal issue with dropping in High Republic elements to a book like Legacy of Vader, which is set at literally the opposite end of the timeline that we have seen so far. So, and I like to think I'm able to do those things in a way that's both surprising, but also makes perfect sense. So if, let's say, again, this is not something I have done, but let's say, I know I'll say something that's not possible to have happen. So, but like if Loden Greatstorm were to show up in the Kylo book, who is, that is not happening. But if that were to happen, I would do it in such a way that it made sense. And you're like, oh, of course, obviously this is how Loden Greatstorm would show up. And I like to do that with any timeline connectivity I have, because it like lands with like a thunk, I think, in the mind of the reader, like, oh, of course, I didn't see that, but that makes tons of sense. So I think there's lots of that stuff, believe me, in Legacy of Vader, even though Loden Greatstorm does not appear.
Okay, just to be clear.
Correct, not just an Easter egg. It's it feels like this is part of the history that, like, the shared history that would make sense.
Yeah. Let's move on to Jedi Knights. That is the next series to release on March 5th. So, Marc, you said that each issue is following two different Jedi. How do you go about managing such a massive cast of characters?
Well, it's interesting, and I actually, made it harder on myself because in the first issue, I actually don't have my 2 Jedi rule, my rule of 2. It's actually like a whole group of Jedi, because I wanted to start the book out with a real bang. So, it's the first issue it's got everyone in it. It's got Yoda and Mace Windu and Coyote Mundi and Ben Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn and a bunch of new Jedi, really want to sort of come out of the gate, very strong before we start pairing people off. And the way I've sort of managed the cast is, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's like there's literally thousands of Jedi in this period. Is I really sort of tried to match different, Jedi to the appropriate story. For example, this is way after way deep into the run, but we have an issue that centers around Keller and Beck, and that's because it's about the finding of this youngling who has who's Force sensitive and who's going to become a Padawan, and Kelleran seemed like the right Jedi to feature in that story. In other cases, I've got Qui-Gon and Ben Kenobi, because part of the fun there is playing with that master apprentice dynamic that they've got going on. So it's sort of matching the story to the Jedi and the Jedi to the story.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that Keller and Beck detail. I was able to read the first issue of this as well, and there was a little tease, and I was like, "Is that Keller and Beck?"
Yeah, that's Keller and Beck. And actually, what's very cool about the first issue is we end, spoiler alert, we end the first issue with Kenobi basically using the Force to see the future, and what he's seeing is actually things that are going to happen in the series. So we sort of end with this big, beautiful double-page spread that the artist Madabek Muzbekokov drew, that really shows you like little teases of what you can expect in the first 10 issues.
Was there a pairing of Jedi that you put together, like a fun odd couple, or just a pair that you were like, this is a great idea, this is really fun, that you kind of high-fived yourself over?
Yes. So we have an issue that I think is really, really cool, that pairs Yaddle up with Count Dooku.
No.
And we know from the Tales of the Jedi animated series that Yaddle is going to be killed by Count Dooku. So first of all, what's cool is we actually begin the issue with sort of a revisitation of that episode. So the connection between the Disney Plus series and the comic is like super tight.
Can I interject one thing very briefly about Marc's? Because he's working with Madabek Muzbekov, who is spectacular. He drew a lot of the last chunk of the Star Wars series that I wrote before this one, and he is really firing on all cylinders. And so I think everybody listening to this should look forward to seeing Madabek's art. And similarly, Luke Ross on the Kylo book is doing.
Oh, it looks so good.
Everything I do with him just levels up. He's doing the best work ever. And we'll talk about it, but I should know, but don't know who's drawing yours.
This Rising Star, Phil Noto.
Oh, I did know that. Yeah, Phil's incredible.
Yeah, it's a dream.
So the art on these books, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point in this conversation. But it, you got to talk about the artist when you're talking about the comics. It's definitely a team effort, and all of the art on these is top notch across the board.
Yeah, and one of the things for us is also you want to serve story that fits the narrative and pushes the story along, but you want to keep it's comics 101. You want to keep the artist excited. You want to give Phil the big cinematic he does so well, and that's just the challenge on us. And then the end result is this hopefully beautiful thing that is visually driven.
Yeah. Anyways, I just didn't want to.
No. That's I'm honestly like I could spend the rest of the interview only talking about Madabek's work.
Yeah.
Because he's just leveled up in such an enormous way. The third issue introduces sort of the kaiju to Star Wars, basically, and the entire issue is all splash pages, and Madabek just blew the door straight off of it. And this was after his work on issue 2, which previously was my favorite thing he'd ever done. So he just keeps getting better with each issue. He's already was starting at such a high level to begin with. It's mind boggling. And what's really, really cool is Madibek, I'm working far enough ahead of him that Madibek is slated to draw the first 10 issues of the series consistently. And that is such a rarity in comic books these days, to have the exact same art team working, for such a long run of issues. So I can't say enough wonderful things about the work he's doing.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting the artists, because they are all doing a fantastic job. Alex, I have not read your first issue, but I was allowed to see some of the art, and it's very compelling. Like, I don't know what the story beats are, but a lot of it looks very cool.
I won't spoil it, where you see that ship, and Phil just kind of hit it out of the park. It just it's so unexpected, but also familiar, which is, he just got the theme, and I'm so lucky to be working with him, because he just makes everything easy. Yeah.
Such a pro.
Yeah.
Is it the Starship Enterprise?
Yeah.
Wow.
That would be
What a twist.
Marc, you've mentioned that not all of the Jedi characters are familiar. You've created some of your own. Do you have one that you are most excited to introduce to fans?
Yeah, in issue 2, in issue 1 we meet her, but we feature her in issue 2 alongside Yoda. Is a new Jedi named Vecna Mooncrest, and she's
just a killer name, by the way.
Thank you. It's very I've actually had Mooncrest in my back pocket. Like I keep in my notes app on my phone, I keep just sort of a list of Star Wars names, and I've had that one in my back pocket, saving it for a special character. And what's really cool about Vecna is that she's, I don't want to say that she's the first disabled Jedi. Probably Luke technically was that, but she is disabled, and she's had to overcome this sort of congenitive condition, and she's just an incredible badass fighter. And pairing her with Yoda was very intentional on my part. I wanted, she's sort of basically a newly minted, as I like to say, Jedi Knight. And I wanted to pair her with sort of like the Jedi of Jedi, which to me is Yoda, to sort of see how those two generations interact, but also to give, Vecna a chance to really, really shine in comparison to Yoda. And they're actually, their story is called The Deepest Cut. And that's both a literal and figurative title, because I'm going way, 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 way back into Star Wars ephemera with this issue, because back in the 80s, shortly after Return of the Jedi, the Kenner toy company basically had pitched something called The Saga Continues, which was their own sort of mythology for Star Wars, a brand new set of bad guys and a brand new, set of vehicles and everything. And I have dug back into the archives and pulled those characters and those vehicle designs into canon, and we'll get to see Aetha Prime, who was the Darth Vader of that series, actually in canon, in the flesh. Madibek's interpretation of him is unbelievably amazing, cool. And it's gonna be a really, really cool issue.
I was absolutely going to ask you about, is it Aetha Prime? I've always said Aetha Prime, but I'll go with your.
No one knows.
No one knows. That's right. Well, I'm going with Aetha.
I'll go with Aetha too. I'll go with your judgment. So how did that all come about? Because that is such a deep cut for a villain. How did you come to that point to include him and other elements from that Kenner line into the story?
I learned about the Kenner line, years earlier, and it always struck me as this really cool, path not taken in Star Wars. And the designs were, I thought, really, really great. I think Aetha's design is killer. And I sort of, it's one of the, sort of like with Vecna's name, it was something I've sort of always had in my back pocket, as it would be great to see this, canonized. And when I was, when I was working up my pitch for Jedi Knights, and I knew I wanted each issue to be its own self-contained story, that means you have to come up with a lot of ideas, and a lot of stories. Mm-hmm. I thought, this is actually a perfect marriage of time period and concept, because having, generating non-Sith threats for the Jedi to face is, I think, one of the challenges of the book. But when you sort of find those, when you create those antagonists, you have this wonderful opportunity. And I thought, oh, this is a great, like, especially like my version of Aetha Prime is a real significant threat, and will be actually in subsequent issues. We'll also be dealing with the consequences of the stuff that he's up to in issue 2, without spoiling that too.
Something else I was very pleasantly surprised with in that first issue was how much humor you injected into the Jedi, who are often seen as just so stoic.
Yes.
Which Jedi would you say you had the most fun writing?
Ooh, good question. Coyote has such like a dry biscuit humor that that was a lot of fun. I actually gave a little bit to Qui-Gon, a little bit of zhuzh to Qui-Gon, because he's, the way I'm sort of writing him is really sort of leaning into the contrarian sort of, he's not, when we meet him in Phantom Menace, he's a little bit of a renegade. And he's not, afraid to tell Yoda, no, I'm going to train this kid. Like, I know you don't want me to, but I'm doing it. Like the aspect of Qui-Gon with a little bit of a wink in his eye is fun for me. Obviously I grew up on Star Wars, but Empire Strikes Back was so impactful to me because it's actually a very funny movie. There's a lot of humor in it. And so to me, humor and sort of those witty Lawrence Kasdan-esque lines is part of Star Wars DNA for me. So whenever I can, add a little bit of humor, I always like to.
I wanted to bring up the Han Solo and Chewbacca miniseries that you wrote previously. I thought it was so much fun. I loved how pulpy it was. Each issue ended with like this major cliffhanger that was then, resolved in the very next page. I imagine that you can't really do that with this since each issue is following a different set of characters. But how are you able to weave like an overarching story while jumping between different characters?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, thank you very, very much for asking that, because, the potential downside of having each issue be a done in one is it can feel like an anthology, and it can feel like it doesn't have a forward momentum to it. So, kind of like designing a TV show, what I've done is I've made each quote unquote episode, these done in one stories, but there is a through line that carries us through the first 10 issues. And what that is in issue 1, we introduce this very sort of mysterious, ninja-like, formidable fighter named Corlys Wrath, who has some agenda, some vendetta against Qui-Gon that is a mystery. It's a mystery even to Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon's like, I have never met this guy before. I've never seen him before in my life. I have no idea why he wants to kill me. So there's this mystery that is, threaded through the first 10 issues. And like, issue 6 ends with, technically a cliffhanger, and issues 9 and 10 will be our first true 2-parter, where we will wrap up the Corlys Wrath storyline, and then I'll launch another storyline off of that, just so that there's there is this sort of through line through the book that you're. One of the things that I always loved, from comics like from the 80s was I would love the subplots, even though the story would get wrapped up, whatever the story was in this individual issue, there was like a subplot that, would draw you into the next issue. And I'm trying to, do a little bit of that with Jedi Knights. Yeah. And I will say, like, it's, just done in one stories they just are very, very, very rare. Yeah. It's and I sort of realized why it's hard. Like, tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end in 20 pages. It's very, it's challenging. Also, editorial laid down a gauntlet for me when I started the book, and they're like, we would like to see 3 splash pages per issue. It's like, so
You just did the whole issue.
and I just like, I'm like, here's issue 3.
You can average it out.
Yeah,
across,
yeah.
you get 20 here.
But yeah, so we're, it sort of forces a very sort of compressed form of storytelling, which I really like. Like I'm excited by it. It reminds me of the comic books of the 80s where things, weren't quite as attenuated. And I think it makes each issue, feel like they may be only 20 pages, but you'll feel like you're getting 40 pages worth of story.
Last but not least, obviously, I'm very excited to discuss the newly announced flagship Star Wars series coming out on May 7th. So, Alex, before we dive into that title, you also just completed the 12-issue macro series surrounding the Battle of Jakku. And those events have been covered in several stories, books and video games and short stories. So what was the biggest challenge you faced pulling all of those sources into 12 issues?
Yeah, I think the big challenge was respecting and obviously honoring all the established stuff that happened, but figuring out what is this big thread that explains where Luke and Leia and Han are during this period and what their role is and how it leads into Jakku. And it was a challenge, and I think the contrast between the flagship and the first arc we have is, Jakku is almost like we're in a pinball machine. We're bouncing from story to story and kind of reflecting everything that happened and giving Adelhard his moment. But then also the flagship is basically us ramping up and flying out there into this uncharted territory, which was a lot of fun and almost like a sigh of relief. Like we've had this epic moment and we've showcased this key part of history. And it was really, we were just talking about it before, just the challenge of writing for multiple artists and multiple series and kind of juggling everything, but also giving this meaningful threat and explaining where all these players were on the board was really a fun puzzle to work out in my brain. And now with the flagship, it's like we've hit open air almost. We and each issue is a standalone. You have this big political intrigue percolating in the background, but like issue 2 is very much almost a Western. You have Luke solo on this planet on the far reaches of space, and he's learning parts about the bigger threat, but it's really, what is the problem I'm dealing with now? In issue 3, we go to Cloud City and we have a very noir murder mystery in this one issue. And then we lead into kind of the big conclusion of the arc, which I think will surprise a lot of people in terms of what we see and who we see and the hardware we see. It'll be fun.
You just brought up something that I had never really considered before in comics, but you mentioned writing for different artists. Does your writing style, this is a question for all of you, I guess, does your writing style change depending on who is handling the art?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for the first Jakku mini, we had Leonard Kirk, who's a great superhero artist. He just does action so well, and those character beats so well. The second series was Stefano Raffaele, who I think does the character moments really well and has this great, almost film noir-y style. Like his character, the little quiet moments really are evocative. And Jethro Morales, who did the most of the third series, is very much an action artist. And
he's great too.
Yeah, really good, just can draw anything. And so I felt very blessed to work with the three of them. And one thing that Marvel Editorial did very well was they had the artists for the next miniseries do a backup in the first issue of, am I saying this right? So there was a backup in every first issue that was drawn by the artist of the next series. So it was like a team effort. And so yeah, you definitely play to the strengths of the artist. I always have a conversation and say, what do you want to draw? Let's, like what from this springboard has you jazzed? And it was really a fun experiment.
The sort of unspoken corollary to what Alex just described is a real reality of writing monthly comics for the big two. So that's Marvel and DC, is that you are almost always writing out of order.
Yeah.
Because every artist on a book takes longer than the amount of time between the issues being released to draw the book, generally speaking. The production timeline is longer than the gap between issues being released, which means even if you get started way, way in advance, the time gets eaten up and inevitably other artists come on to draw the book. But because they need to start writing and they have their own timelines and all that stuff, you often could be writing issue 3 and issue 7 at the same time. Yeah. And that is something you just get used to as part of the job. It's one of the it's sort of a small price to pay for getting to work with these absolutely extraordinary artists. It just takes time to create superhero or Star Wars or sort of mainstream comics art at the level that the audience expects. And so we all are just sort of, it's small price to pay basically, but it definitely requires some mental gymnastics to sort of, because while you're writing that issue 7, you also have to have a pretty good idea of what happens in issues 4, 5, and 6. So you don't blow anything, it's complicated. There's a lot of 50 million things straight in your head at the same time. But again, it's part of the gig, and it probably benefits us in the rest of our lives in ways we don't even know.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always, you have a pretty tight outline. We all have to outline pretty tightly just to get stuff approved and discussed. But there's always that little gray area where you're like, I didn't put that in the outline, but I put it in this issue. So you hope that it all lines up, and you just try really hard to make it line up. And we have these great artists that give us the opportunity to not have to put so many words on paper because they tell the story so well on their own.
Yep.
Well, going back to the flagship Star Wars title, I think it's interesting that you described the Battle of Jakku as ping-ponging around. I thought it was so ambitious and just so much was happening. And then you say that reaching the end is like a sigh of relief, where I'm I think now we have time to breathe. And I mean, that was a year-long time period for the in between Endor and Jakku. You got 12 issues, but Charles just did a year-long gap in between episodes 5 and 6, and he got 50 issues. So I'm really excited to see what you get to do, not just with more issues, but more space in the timeline, because you have this huge stretch of time available to you. So what are the biggest advantages and some disadvantages to being given so much space?
I think the advantage is you have breathing room to really get into the heads of these characters. What are Leia's goals? She's a new mom. She's also absorbed this great political responsibility. Where's Han at, and what are his goals, and what are his stressors? And Luke, Luke is going on this journey to obviously learn about his past and piece together the history of the Jedi. But how does he do that when he's also getting pulled into these other problems? And I think, having that space to tell these stories and really lean into the characters while also introducing new threats, but new supporting casts and new allies. I think, it was a sigh of relief, but I think the challenge with Jakku was let's weave all these threads together and have it feel like it's this big epic movement, and make sure that Adelhard doesn't just feel like a one-note villain, but an actual threat and an actual reason for these characters to be focused on him. And so that's the contrast. We have a little more runway here, which is great. But I do feel like we did give everyone a meaningful beat in the Jakku stuff.
Now with the Empire largely defeated at Jakku and the Sith are off hiding on Exegol, what kind of threats can we expect our heroes to be facing in the time that follows?
I think the big question is what happens to all this stuff. The Empire was this great threat, but what happens to the ships, to the weapons, and who's piecing it together? And I think a lot of people assume, okay, well, now the Empire is gone, everyone's going to line up and sign up for the New Republic, because why wouldn't you? And I think there's a lot of space to be played with there, because there's a lot of reasons, planets might not want to be part of the New Republic. So we explore that and who's working in the background to manipulate that. So there's a lot of political intrigue, but I don't want the political intrigue to overshadow the big action and the big character moments and the stuff that makes Star Wars to me and to a lot of fans. And so we'll have those big moments, but also there's something percolating in the background that will come into play towards the end of the first arc that I think will surprise people.
You're no stranger to the New Republic era, because you also wrote the Poe Dameron novel Freefall, which was a lot of fun. What do you find most compelling about this entire period, which is a long stretch of the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I liken it to just hitting open air. We with the Jakku stuff, there was a lot of dancing between the raindrops and making sure that we recognized everything. And now there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been established, but also, like Charles said, you go for it and you see if they approve it. And if they don't, like Marc said, they usually come back and give you an alternative. So that's been the fun part, is really going big and then getting pulled back a little bit. And so I think you can expect some surprising villains. And I hate to generalize, because I know it's not coming out until May, but I'm really trying to treat each issue as its own mini event, and they all weave together, but really character driven and almost like genre shifting. Issue 3 is like a murder mystery. Issue 2 is a little lone wolf and cub-esque. And issue 1 is we kick the doors down and show you what this new era is about.
So cool.
Yeah.
Sounds really awesome.
Is Loden Greatstorm in it?
Yes.
It's great. Great
No,
to
and
hear.
there are always going to be nods. Like, and I think Charles and I are very simpatico. We're all very similar storytellers in how we approach stuff. There are Easter eggs and loads of fun stuff, but it all is in service to the story. I never want to feel like I'm just throwing stuff in to get that one message board post that says "cool,"
Right.
obviously, but you want it to feel like it's essential and part of the story.
Yeah. The cart can drag the horse.
Yeah.
Was there a genre that you were especially excited to tackle within Star Wars as you kind of shift between all these different issues?
Yeah, I think issue 1 was the most I mean, they're all fun, but I think, I'm primarily a crime novelist, and I think so people often assume like, well, he's going to write the murder mystery stuff or the noir stuff. And for me, I love the political intrigue. I think that's fun, especially the world build, the geopolitical stuff where they're basically trying to form this collection of planets, and it's not always easy, as we see just in the world. Like, and also the high flying space stuff that I had a great time doing with Poe, and your Poe run was hugely influential on just like kind of doing the early stuff. Like I tried to make sure there were a lot of echoes there, but I think the big picture sci-fi stuff is what's been most fun.
This is a little bit outside of your comic work, but the video game Star Wars Outlaws gave the Spice Runners of Kijimi some competition on their homeworld with another criminal syndicate called the Ishiga Clan.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was meeting them, I kept thinking about your character, Zeva Bliss, and how she probably wouldn't be too happy with them setting up in their territories. So I'm curious if you had any thoughts about the Ishiga Clan moving in as like rivals to the Spice Runners. How do you think Zeva would have handled that?
I think she would not be happy. I mean, Ziva is one of my favorite characters in that she's ruthless, and Izori is also very ruthless, but Ziva has this kind of cutthroat mentality that I is such a blast to write, and just that world, that kind of underworld, is something I love playing with. So I think it would make for an interesting story. It's not something we're going to address right away, but yeah.
Can we expect any links to like Ziva and Freefall? And I mean, the Spice Runners showed up in the Battle of Jakku, so are they going to continue to be players in this time period?
Yeah, I have a soft spot for those characters: Tommaso, Ziva Bliss, and the core crew that eventually will adopt Poe for a short time and see him on his way. So I don't think it's a Star Wars story if it doesn't have some element of that for me. But yeah, maybe not right out of the gate. I think for me, right out of the gate is like, let's play with the big toys, let's make some noise, and really kind of establish the tone.
Well, those are the last of my questions, and we're reaching the end of our time. So thank you, Charles, Marc, and Alex, for taking some time to talk to us all today. Can't wait to read all your stories.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us.
And thank you all for watching or listening today. Check out Legacy of Vader on February 5th, Jedi Knights on March 5th, and the new Star Wars run on May 7th. Everyone have a great day, and may the Force be with you.